The dog in Kennel 14 had been there for 11 days and had not made a sound. Not when the other dogs barked. Not when the morning feeding cart came through. Not when the shelter staff opened his kennel door to check his water, which they had started doing more often than protocol required, because there was something about the way this dog received attention. Patient, still. Without any of the jumping or whining of the animals around him, that made them want to give it. He would look at the person who entered, hold the eye contact for a moment with a directness that none of them could quite name, and then look away toward the far wall of the kennel, as if whatever he was looking for was not there yet, but he had not stopped believing it would be. He was a German Shepherd, approximately 6 years old per the intake vet's estimate, with a black and tan coat that had gone slightly rough from weeks on the road. His paws were worn down in a way that told whoever examined them that he had been moving for a long time before someone found him. He had been picked up by a county animal control officer on Highway 93 south of Missoula, Montana, walking alone on the shoulder in the rain at 4 in the morning. No collar, no chip reading on the standard scanner. A 2-inch scar above his left eye that the intake vet had noted in her report as consistent with blunt force trauma, older, well-healed. He had been given a kennel number and a temporary name. The name on his card said Bruno. That was not his name. Before we go any further, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Subscribe and stay until the very end, because what a shelter worker in Missoula, Montana figured out on a Tuesday afternoon is something that should not have been possible, and that changed everything. Sergeant Danny Reyes was 29 years old and had been looking for her dog for 3 years, 1 month, and 11 days. She was not the kind of person who counted days. She had not started out counting. But somewhere in the second year, when the calls stopped coming back and the emails went unanswered, and the official channels had produced nothing but form letters with language about administrative processing and case backlogs, and units being unable to confirm placement records at this time, she had started keeping a number in her head the way you keep a number when it is the only thing you can control. 3 years, 1 month, 11 days. That was how long it had been since Corporal, the dog she had worked with for 2 years across 2 deployments in Helmand Province, the dog she had applied to adopt the same week she filed her separation paperwork, had disappeared into a military bureaucracy that could not tell her where he was. She was 5'4", compact and deliberate in her movements, with dark brown eyes that people often described as serious, before they knew her well enough to understand that serious was not quite the right word. The right word was focused. She had been focused since she was 14 years old, growing up in Tucson, in a house where focus was what you had instead of margin for error. And she had carried it into the Marine Corps and through 3 years at Camp Pendleton and across 2 Helmand deployments, and home to Tucson again, when her enlistment ended and Corporal did not come with her the way she had been promised he would. She had been promised. That was the part she did not let herself say too often, because it led somewhere she could not afford to stay. The Marine Corps Military Working Dog Program had a formal adoption process. Handlers applied. The applications were reviewed. There was paperwork and timelines, and a process that was supposed to result in a trained military working dog coming home to the person who knew him best and who had earned the right to take care of him for the rest of his life. Her application had been approved. She had the letter. It was in a folder in the filing cabinet in her apartment in Tucson that she had not opened in 8 months, because opening it led to the things she could not afford to stay inside too long. What had happened after the approval was what the Marine Corps called an administrative transfer error. Corporal had been moved from the holding facility in Yuma, Arizona, where he had been waiting during her separation processing, to a contracted boarding facility in California while a kennel capacity issue was resolved. The boarding facility had him for 6 weeks. Then there had been a second transfer. The contracted facility's records showed a pickup, a vehicle, a date, and a handler number that did not match anything in the official system. After that, the trail ended. She had spent 3 years following it anyway. She had called the MNWD program office 47 times. She had filed 4 formal inquiries through her congressman's office, 2 of which had generated responses that said the matter was being reviewed, and 2 of which had generated no response at all. She had hired a veterans advocacy attorney named Patricia Gould, who had spent 8 months working the case before telling Donnie honestly that she had found the same wall at the end of every road, and that finding Corporal through official channels appeared to require someone inside the system caring enough to actually look. She had posted in every military working dog network and handler forum she could find. She had contacted every shelter and rescue organization in Southern California, Arizona, and Nevada in the first year, and had expanded the geographic search in the second and third years as the possibility of an unofficial transfer took shape in her mind. The possibility was this: someone had taken Corporal without authorization. Not maliciously, she had come to believe the most likely scenario, based on everything Patricia had been able to piece together, was that a contracted handler had believed he was performing a legitimate transfer and had placed Corporal with a private party who had either not known the dog's origin or had not asked. It happened. The contracts were loose. The oversight was inconsistent. Animals moved through the gaps. The fact that it happened did not make it acceptable, and did not make Corporal easier to find. She had been sleeping badly for 3 years. She had a good job, a position with a Veterans Services nonprofit in Tucson that she was good at and that mattered. And she had a small apartment and a friend group that understood, mostly, that there was a part of her that was occupied with something they could not help with. She had not stopped functioning. She had simply organized her functioning around a search that she refused to stop, and around a number that kept increasing, and around a folder in a filing cabinet that she had not opened in 8 months. She had never stopped believing she would find him. She had never let herself examine that belief too closely, because belief examined too carefully becomes a question, and she did not have room for the question. The shelter worker who called her on a Tuesday afternoon in March was named Ren Collado, and she was 24 years old and had been working at the Missoula County Animal Shelter for 14 months and had a habit that her supervisor described as a productive problem. She looked things up. The dog in Kennel 14 had come in 11 days ago with no chip reading and no identification, and that had bothered Ren in the specific way that things bother people who are accustomed to finding answers. The standard scanner had returned nothing. That happened sometimes. Chips migrated. Readers malfunctioned. Older chip formats didn't always register on newer equipment. What was less standard was the dog himself. His posture. His response to handling. The way he moved through the kennel space, with a precision that suggested not just prior training, but extensive prior training. The kind that took years to build, and that did not belong to a dog who had spent his life as a family pet. She had borrowed the shelter director's secondary scanner, an older model kept for exactly this kind of situation, on day 3. It had found a chip. The chip number ran to a registration database that returned a single record, and the record stopped at a military contract number that the public database was not authorized to display in full. Ren had written down the contract number and spent her lunch break on a federal procurement database that she had bookmarked 8 months earlier after a different dog had come in with a partial military record, and she had learned, in the process of figuring out what to do about it, that military working dog contract numbers followed a specific format that could be cross-referenced against publicly available procurement records. It had taken her 40 minutes of that lunch break and 2 granola bars to trace the contract number to a MEMWD unit designation, and another 20 minutes on a military working dog handler advocacy forum. She had joined it 8 months ago, after the previous dog, to find a post that matched the unit designation with a list of handlers who had filed adoption requests for dogs from that unit and had not received them. Danny Reyes's name was on the list. There was a contact email in the post. Wren looked at it for a moment. Then she looked up the phone number that the advocacy forum listed alongside the email because she was 24 and understood that emails could sit unread and that this was not a situation that should sit. She called the number. Danny was at her desk at the Tucson nonprofit when her phone rang with a Montana area code she did not recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. She had let a lot of calls go to voicemail over 3 years when she could not face another conversation that ended at a wall. She answered it. "Is this Sergeant Danny Reyes?" Wren said, "who served with a military working dog from the Camp Pendleton WD unit, designation 9. "Yes," Danny said. Her voice had stopped working correctly. "I think I have your dog," Wren said. The shelter was quiet on the other end of the line. Danny was standing now without having decided to stand, one hand on the edge of her desk, the Tucson afternoon coming through the window in the flat bright light of March. "Tell me his name," Danny said. It came out as something between a sentence and a request, and something harder than both. "If you have him, tell me his name." Wren looked at the kennel card in her hand. The card said Bruno. She looked at the chip record on her screen. She said the name on the chip record. She said, "Corporal." The sound on the other end of the line was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when something they have held themselves together against for 3 years and 1 month and 11 days suddenly has an edge, and past the edge there is a 24-year-old shelter worker in Montana, holding a phone and a kennel card and a chip record that says the name that nobody who did not know this dog would have any reason to know. Danny sat back down. It took her a moment. "Don't let him go," she said. "I'm coming." "He's not going anywhere," Wren said. "I put a hold on him the day he came in. I didn't know why yet. I just knew." She drove. She did not fly because there was no flight that left fast enough, and because she needed the 17 hours to arrive at something close to functional, and because somewhere in New Mexico in the dark of that first night, she understood that she had needed to move toward this under her own power and at her own speed, which was the way she had been moving for 3 years, and which felt like the only honest way to cover the last stretch of it. She called Patricia Gould from somewhere in Utah at 2 a.m. Patricia answered with the alert voice of a woman who had given Donnie her personal number, specifically for calls like this one. Donnie told her about Wren's call. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I need you to let me handle the legal piece," Patricia said. "Don't sign anything. Don't let them tell you there's a standard process. There is a process, and I know what it is, and I'm going to make sure it happens correctly this time." Danny said she understood. Patricia called the Missoula County Animal Shelter at 8 the following morning and spoke with the shelter director, a woman named Colleen Marsh, who had been briefed by Wren and who was, by all accounts, already on Danny's side before Patricia made the case. Colleen had worked animal welfare for 22 years. She had opinions about how military animals ended up in county shelters with no identification. She expressed them to Patricia directly and without filtering them. And Patricia said afterward that it had been one of the more satisfying phone calls of her professional career. Donnie pulled into the shelter parking lot in Missoula at 11:14 on a Wednesday morning. She had not slept. She had stopped twice for gas and once for coffee, and had eaten something forgettable in Idaho that she could not remember afterward. She sat in the car for 3 minutes in the parking lot because she had been moving toward this for 3 years, and she needed one moment to be still before it was real. Wren met her at the front desk. She was smaller than Danny had imagined from the phone, and younger, with the careful, watchful manner of someone who understands that she is standing at the edge of something that does not belong to her, and is doing her best to hold it steady until the person it belongs to arrives. She led Danny through the shelter without talking much, because she had already said what she needed to say, and the rest was not hers to narrate. The door to Kennel 14 was closed. Wren stopped in front of it. "Take as long as you need," she said. She stepped back. Danny put her hand on the kennel door. She had been rehearsing this moment for 3 years without meaning to, imagining it at night, cutting the thought off before it got too specific, because imagining it required believing it would happen, and belief examined too closely became a question. She had never let herself get to the question. She had simply kept moving, and kept the number and opened the folder as rarely as she could manage. She opened the door. Corporal was at the back of the kennel, standing the way he always stood when he heard something that required assessment before commitment. His ears were forward. His amber eyes moved to her face and did not move away. He did not bark. He had not made a sound in 11 days. He crossed the kennel in 4 steps, not running, moving with the particular directness of a trained animal who has identified the correct destination and is proceeding to it, and pressed his head against Donnie's sternum with a force that was not gentle and was not rough, and that knocked the breath out of her completely, and she wrapped both arms around him and went down to the kennel floor, and Corporal stayed. He pressed himself against her and stayed. Wren was looking at the wall of the corridor. She was 24 years old and had worked at the shelter for 14 months and had seen a great many reunions between animals and the people who loved them, and she had cried at most of them. This was different. This was not a reunion between a pet and an owner. This was the closing of a debt that the world owed and had been slow to pay, and the weight of 3 years was in the room with them, and Wren understood that her job in this moment was to witness it, and to not intrude upon it, and to be glad that she had looked things up. She was all 3 of those things. Patricia Gould filed the legal paperwork for Corporal's formal release and transfer of ownership that afternoon, working from a coffee shop 2 blocks from the shelter, while Danny sat on the floor of Kennel 14. Colleen Marsh countersigned the shelter documentation by 3 o'clock. The military ownership record required a separate filing with the MWD program office, which Patricia had already drafted, and which she filed electronically before 5. The program office responded, a response time Patricia described as historically unprecedented, in which she attributed to the combination of an airtight filing, a congressional inquiry she had quietly activated 3 days prior, and a program officer named Major Tate, who had apparently been waiting for exactly this kind of paper trail to act on something he had wanted to act on for some time. The formal transfer of Corporal to Donnie Reyes was confirmed in writing at 9:17 the following morning. The question of how Corporal had ended up on a Montana highway with no collar and a migrated chip was answered 4 weeks later, when Patricia's congressional contact forwarded the results of an internal inquiry that had been initiated after her filing. The contracted handler who had picked up Corporal from the California boarding facility had placed him with a private individual in Nevada who had been told the dog was a retired service animal being rehomed, and who had no reason to believe otherwise. The Nevada individual had relocated twice in 3 years, once to Oregon, once to rural Montana, and had ultimately been unable to care for Corporal during a family medical emergency, and had, by his own account, placed the dog on a county road with food and water, and the belief that someone would find him and give him a better situation. He had not known Corporal's history. He had not known anyone was looking. He had not been a villain, He had simply been the end of a chain of inadequate oversight that had begun the day an unauthorized pickup had been entered into a contract log without verification. Patricia Gould filed an administrative complaint against the contracted facility. The facility's WD contract was suspended pending review. A revised transfer verification protocol was implemented by the WD program office, a protocol that Major Tate had written that required biometric confirmation on all contracted pickups, and that was named, informally, after no one, the way most administrative reforms that matter are named after no one. Ren Colato received a commendation letter from the Missoula shelter director, a handwritten note from Patricia Gould, and a photograph that arrived in the mail 8 weeks after the reunion, Danny and Corporal on a trail outside Tucson, the Sonoran Desert wide and gold behind them, the dog's ears up and his eyes forward, and his whole posture carrying the settled authority of an animal who has located the correct place and has no intention of leaving it. Ren put the photograph on the bulletin board above her desk. She looked things up every day. This was the one she would tell people about. 6 months after the Wednesday in Missoula, Donnie Reyes and Corporal ran 4 miles on a trail north of Tucson in the early morning before the heat arrived, the way they ran every morning now, which was the same way they had run together in Helmand. Donnie in front, Corporal slightly behind and to the left, covering the angle she could not see, because that was his instinct, and because 3 years in the world had not changed it. The scar above his eye had faded further in the sun. His paws had healed. He slept across the bottom of her bed with the weighted stillness of an animal who has nothing left to be vigilant about, because the right person is in the room. Patricia Gould settled the administrative complaint against the contracted facility in November. The settlement included a financial contribution to the National Canine Veterans Memorial Foundation and a written commitment to revised handling protocols that Patricia made sure were specific enough to be enforceable. She was not satisfied that it was enough. She said so, in writing, in the settlement notes, because she had learned that the record was the thing, and the record should reflect what actually happened. Donnie spent a Saturday in December at a legislative aid's office in Phoenix, bringing her case to a state-level hearing on military working dog adoption rights. She brought the folder from the filing cabinet. She brought the approval letter. She brought the documentation of 47 phone calls and 4 congressional inquiries and 3 years, 1 month, and 11 days. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The record spoke with more authority than volume could achieve, and Donnie Reyes had learned, in 2 Helmand deployments and in a search that had lasted longer than some wars, that the most effective thing a person can do in a room that is not listening is to make the record impossible to ignore. Corporal waited in the car. She had cracked the window and left him water and told him she would be back in an hour. He was there when she returned, sitting in the passenger seat, looking out the windshield at the parking garage with the alert, patient expression of a dog who has decided that wherever this person goes, the correct thing to do is wait. She had come back. She always would. He had always known that. That was why he had not stopped looking toward the kennel door. Sometimes the search is the story, not the finding, the searching. The 47 calls, the folder in the cabinet. The number kept in the head because it was the only thing that could be controlled. We do not tell enough of those stories, the ones that span years without a resolution seen, without a moment where something breaks open and everything becomes clear. Those stories are mostly just a person getting up in the morning and making a decision to keep going, and then doing that again the next day, and then again for 3 years and 1 month and 11 days, because they believed something that they could not afford to examine too closely, and they were right. And sometimes God places someone in a shelter in Montana with a borrowed scanner and a lunch break, and a habit of looking things up. And the right number leads to the right record, and the right record has a name on it. And the name is the one that was supposed to come home 3 years ago. And a phone rings in Tucson, and a woman who has been moving for 3 years is given permission to stop. Not every debt gets paid. But some do, and the ones that do tend to be paid through ordinary people who decided that an unanswered question was unacceptable, who borrowed a scanner, who read a forum post, who followed the number to the end of the chain and then picked up the phone. You are surrounded by people like that. You may be one of them. The question is only whether you will decide that the answer matters enough to look. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to know that 3 years is not forever and that lost is not the same as gone. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And tell us, have you ever kept searching for something long after most people would have stopped? Your story may be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you believe in the bond between a handler and her dog, and the courage of ordinary people who look things up and make the call, please subscribe so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, and honor the searching. Because the searching is not nothing. The searching is everything.